Her boyfriend yelled a deadly threat. But a nearby listener heard more than just words. He saw a ghost from his past. Now a dangerous offer of protection will force a choice between safety and damnation. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The air in the diner was thick with the smell of old coffee and frying grease, a stark contrast to the ice in Mark's voice. "You're dead when we get home, Chloe. You hear me? Dead." The words, a hissed whisper across the chipped Formica table, sucked all the air from Chloe's lungs. Her hands, clutching a cold ceramic mug, began to tremble, the faint rattle a tiny rebellion in the suffocating silence that had followed their argument. She didn't dare look up from the dark pool of her coffee, seeing only the twisted reflection of the man she'd thought she loved. His handsome face now a mask of cold fury over a forgotten disagreement about a missed turn. What she didn't see but could feel like a shift in atmospheric pressure was the sudden, absolute stillness from the neighboring booth. A booth occupied by 4 large men clad in denim and leather, the back of their vests emblazoned with the infamous winged death's head of the Hells Angels. One of them, a man in his late 50s with a weathered, bearded face and eyes the color of a winter storm, had gone rigid. His name was Arthur, but in this world he was known as Prez. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the venom in the young man's voice was impossible to ignore. It was a tone he'd heard before, a lifetime ago in another life. It was a sound that haunted his dreams. Slowly, deliberately, Arthur turned his head. His gaze swept over Mark, dismissing him as a pathetic, snarling pup before landing on Chloe, and his breath caught in his throat. It was like looking through a window into the past. The same cascade of honey blonde hair, the same wide-set sea-green eyes now shimmering with unshed tears. The same delicate slope of her nose. She was the spitting image of his little sister, Sarah. Sarah, whose laughter used to fill their cramped childhood home. Sarah, who had fallen for a man with a sharp tongue and quicker fists. Sarah, who they'd buried 30 years ago, a tragedy his club, for all its power and fear, had arrived too late to prevent. A cold, focused calm settled over Arthur. This wasn't an intrusion. This was a summons. A second chance delivered by a cruel god on a dusty platter in a roadside diner. Mark, emboldened by Chloe's silence, leaned closer. His voice a low growl. "You think you can embarrass me like that in public? You've got another thing coming, you stupid—" The scrape of a heavy boot on linoleum cut him off. Arthur was standing beside their table, a mountain of denim and quiet menace. He wasn't looking at Mark. His stormy eyes were fixed on Chloe, and in them she saw not a threat, but a profound, unsettling sorrow. "Miss," Arthur's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, surprisingly gentle. "Is this man bothering you?" Mark scoffed, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of bravado. "Back off, Grandpa, this is a private conversation." Arthur's eyes finally slid to Mark, and the temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. The sheer, unconcealed lethality in that gaze made Mark's bluster evaporate. "It didn't sound private," Arthur said, his tone flat and final. It sounded like a threat. He shifted his weight, the leather of his vest creaking, and the patch that read President was now fully visible to Mark, whose face began to pale. "And we have a problem with men who threaten women." One of Arthur's men, a giant of a man named Jaws for his less-than-dental history, materialized behind him, a silent, hulking shadow. It's fine," Chloe stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "We were just leaving." "No," Arthur said, his gaze returning to her, softening imperceptibly. "You were. He's staying." He looked back at Mark. "You're going to sit down, son. You're going to finish your coffee, and you're going to think real hard about the next words that come out of your mouth." The sheer authority in his voice brooked no argument. "Mark, His bravado completely shattered, slumped back into the vinyl booth looking like a scolded child. Arthur offered a hand to Chloe. It was a large, calloused hand, scarred across the knuckles, but the gesture was oddly chivalrous. "Let me give you a ride somewhere safe." Every instinct told Chloe to run, but not from this man, from the one cowering in the booth. This stranger, this outlaw, felt like the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted off its axis. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm, steadying, and he led her out of the diner without a backward glance, leaving Mark under the watchful, cold eyes of Jaws. Outside, the sun was blinding. Arthur led her not to a menacing chopper, but to a pristine, black Ford F-150 Raptor. "More practical for groceries," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips as he opened the passenger door for her. They drove in silence for a while, the only sound the low hum of the engine. Chloe watched the world fly by, her mind reeling. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice small. "Why did you do that?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "You look like someone I failed a long time ago," he said, his voice thick with an old familiar pain. "His name was David. He talked to my sister, Sarah, the way that boy was talking to you. We were young, thought it was just drama. We were busy building our business. By the time we realized it was more, it was too late." He glanced at her, and the raw grief in his eyes was a physical force. "Seeing you there, it was like getting a chance to rewrite the past." He took her to a quiet, safe house apartment the club maintained, a clean, modern space that was nothing like the dark, gritty lair she'd imagined. "Stay here as long as you need," he said, handing her a key. "There's food in the fridge. I'll have one of the guys bring your things from your place." True to his word, later that evening, a surprisingly cheerful biker named Mouse, a computer wizard who looked nothing like his nickname, showed up with her suitcase and laptop bag. "All clear, miss," Mouse said with a gap-toothed grin. "Your ex is currently having a meltdown at his local bank. Seems his accounts are frozen. A real mystery." Chloe's eyes widened. "What did you do?" Mouse just winked. "The Prez just made a call. We have friends in interesting places." Over the next few days, a strange new routine began. Arthur would check on her, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just to sit in silence with her, a solid protective presence. The chemistry between them was a slow-burning fuse. He was a man of violence, a king of a dark empire, yet with her, he was all quiet intensity and old-world manners. She found herself drawn to his stillness, to the profound sense of safety he projected. One evening, as they stood on the balcony watching the city lights, his hand brushed against hers. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, unadulterated tension that made her breath catch. He didn't pull away, and neither did she. The air crackled with everything left unsaid, a promise of heat, of release, of a connection forged in fire. Meanwhile, Mark's life was systematically being dismantled with terrifying efficiency. Arthur sat in his clubhouse office, a room smelling of leather, cigar smoke, and old whiskey. He was surrounded by his most trusted men, Jaws, Mouse, and a calm, methodical man named Paul who handled their more complex financial negotiations. "The target is a weasel, but a connected one," Mouse reported, his fingers flying across a laptop. "He's an account manager at Sterling Financial. Also, he's been dipping into client funds. Small amounts, thinks no one will notice. He's got a gambling problem. Offshore accounts." Arthur nodded, his expression grimly satisfied. "Anonymous tip to his bosses, and to his biggest client, a Mr. Giovanni. Make sure Giovanni understands the depth of the embezzlement." Paul spoke next. "His credit is already shaky. A few more pushes, his car loan, his mortgage. We can call them in, make him unbankable." "Do it," Arthur said, his voice flat. "I want him to have nothing, no money, no job, no place to sleep. I want him to feel the way he made Chloe feel. Powerless. The revenge was executed with the precision of a military operation. Mark was fired after a furious Mr. Giovanni stormed into Sterling Financial, threatening not just a lawsuit but a more permanent form of accounting. His car was repossessed from the office parking lot, a humiliating spectacle for his former colleagues. Collection agencies he'd never heard of began hounding him, and his credit score plummeted into the abyss. Chloe, trying to piece her life back together from the safety of the apartment, watched the fallout from a distance, a mix of grim satisfaction and cold dread coiling in her stomach. This was more than just a scare. This was an annihilation. She confronted Arthur one night after he brought her dinner. His mother called me. She said men came to her house asking about Mark's childhood, about everything. She was terrified. "Arthur, what are you doing?" He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I'm giving him the consequences he deserves. The law would have given him a slap on the wrist if that. He'd have found you again. This way he never will." "But to destroy his entire life?" she whispered, her heart pounding. "He was going to destroy you," Arthur said, his voice softening as he stepped closer. He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. The touch was possessive, gentle, and sent a shiver down her spine. "There's no room for half measures in this world, Chloe, not with men like him. You're safe now, that's all that matters." He leaned in, and his lips met hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a sealing of a pact. It was full of desperate, years-long hunger and a protective fury that stole her breath. She kissed him back, her hands tangling in his leather vest, pulling him closer. In that moment, the morality of his actions blurred, lost in the sheer, overwhelming force of his presence. He was a monster, perhaps, but he was her monster. The next phase of Arthur's plan was more personal. He discovered through Mouse's digital sleuthing that Mark had a side business, a small, shady import operation bringing in counterfeit designer goods. He was in debt to a local crew of low-level thugs for his gambling. Arthur decided to pay this crew a visit. He took Chloe with him, parking the Raptor across the street from a grimy warehouse. "I want you to see this," he said, his voice calm. "I want you to see what he was tangled up in, what you're free from." He and Jaws got out, walking towards the warehouse entrance with an air of casual ownership. Chloe watched, her heart in her throat, as the door was opened by a skinny, nervous-looking man whose eyes nearly popped out of his head when he saw the patches on Arthur's vest. A few minutes of low, murmured conversation, and then Arthur handed the man a thick envelope. The man nodded vigorously, almost bowing. Arthur returned to the truck. "They'll be paying Mark a visit tonight," he said simply, "to collect on his debts, with interest." "You paid them?" Chloe asked, confused. "I bought his debt," Arthur corrected, a cold smile on his face. "Now they work for me, and their instructions are very clear." That night, Mark, now jobless, carless, and holed up in a motel, received the beating of his life. It wasn't just a warning. It was a message, delivered with the clinical efficiency of a business transaction. The final blow came from an unexpected quarter. Arthur, using a shell company, bought Mark's repossessed car and his foreclosed-upon condo at auction for pennies on the dollar. He then handed the deeds to Chloe. They stood in the empty, echoing space of the condo, the same space where Mark had first screamed at her, where he had broken her favorite vase during one of his rages. "It's yours," Arthur said, his voice echoing in the barren room. "Do whatever you want with it. Burn it down. Sell it. It's a clean slate." Chloe looked around, the ghosts of her past relationships swirling in the dust motes, dancing in the sunlight. The justice was absolute. It was terrifying in its completeness. Mark was broken, destitute, and physically battered. He would never, ever come near her again. She turned to Arthur, this man who commanded an army of outlaws, who could bend the world to his will with a phone call. He had given her back her life, her freedom, her future, but he had done it by dragging her into the shadows of his own. She stepped into his embrace, burying her face in the familiar leather of his vest. She was safe. But the question lingered, a whisper in the back of her mind, as intoxicating and dangerous as the man himself. Had she been liberated? Or had she simply traded one powerful monster for another? And as his arms tightened around her, she knew with a thrilling, terrifying certainty that she didn't care. The line between damnation and salvation had never felt so thin or so exhilarating. The story continues. The aftermath of such absolute vengeance leaves its own scars. Chloe now lives in a gilded cage of Arthur's making, her every need anticipated, her safety absolute. But the club's world is one of violence and paranoia. A rival faction, the Vipers, see Arthur's very public protection of her as a weakness, a distraction. They begin to make moves, testing the boundaries. One night, a week after she's moved into her new home, a secure, elegant townhouse Arthur provided, the doorbell rings. Arthur's away on club business. Peering through the peephole, her blood runs cold. It's Mark. He's gaunt, his face a mosaic of yellowing bruises, his clothes hanging off him. But his eyes burn with a desperate, insane light. "Chloe," he rasps, pounding on the door. "I know you're in there. I lost everything. You have to talk to them. You have to call off your dogs." Terrified, she backs away, fumbling for her phone to call Arthur. But before she can dial, a dark sedan pulls up silently. Two of Arthur's men she recognizes as Ripper and Doc, get out. They don't say a word to her. They approach Mark, their movements economical and deadly calm. What follows is a scene of brutal, silent efficiency. There is no loud confrontation. Ripper clamps a hand over Mark's mouth while Doc delivers a single, precise blow to his solar plexus. Mark crumples, all the fight gone out of him. They drag him limp and gasping to the sedan and stuff him in the trunk. The whole thing takes less than 15 seconds. The street is silent again, as if nothing happened. Doc looks up at her window, gives a small, respectful nod, and gets in the car. They drive away. Chloe sinks to the floor, trembling uncontrollably. This was the reality of Arthur's world. This was the cost of his protection. The monster under her bed was now the monster guarding her door, and she had just witnessed the cold, hard truth of what that meant. When Arthur returns, she is still sitting on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. He kneels before her, his face etched with concern. "He won't bother you again," he says, his voice low. "What did you do to him?" she whispers, afraid of the answer. Arthur is silent for a long moment. He's being relocated, given a fresh start in a new city with a very clear understanding of what happens if he ever thinks of you again. He doesn't elaborate, and she finds she doesn't want him to. The ambiguity is both terrifying and comforting. This event solidifies the target on her back from the Vipers. They see her as the key to getting to Arthur. A plan is hatched. A few days later, Chloe is convinced by a new friend, a bubbly woman named Stella she met at a yoga class, to go to a high-end boutique downtown. Stella is fun, effervescent, and seems to understand the pressures of dating a complicated man. It feels good to have a normal girl's day out. What Chloe doesn't know is that Stella is the girlfriend of the Vipers' president. The boutique is a trap. As Chloe is trying on a dress, two large men enter the store, ignoring the protesting clerk. They head straight for her changing room. Stella has mysteriously vanished. "Mr. Viper would like a word," one of them grunts, grabbing her arm. Panic seizes her, but just as suddenly the door to the boutique bursts open. It's Jaws and Paul, their faces set in grim lines. Arthur had never truly let his guard down. He'd had her shadowed, always. The confrontation in the boutique is swift and violent. It's not a shootout, that's bad for business, but a brutal close-quarters brawl. Jaws moves with a shocking speed for his size, disarming one man and slamming his head into a rack of dresses with a sickening crunch. Paul, a master of Krav Maga, disables the other with a series of efficient, devastating strikes. In the chaos, Chloe cowers in the changing room, the sounds of shattering glass and grunts of pain echoing around her. She sees Stella trying to slip out the back, and their eyes meet. In Stella's, she sees not malice, but a resigned fear. This was just the world they lived in. Arthur arrives minutes later, his face a thundercloud. He sweeps Chloe into his arms, holding her tightly. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," he murmurs into her hair. The fear she feels is now mirrored in his eyes. The fear of losing her. That night, the club goes to war. It's a cold, calculated war. Viper-owned businesses are firebombed, their drug shipments are intercepted, their members are arrested on meticulously planted evidence. Arthur's revenge is not hot and passionate. It is a surgical strike, dismantling the Vipers piece by piece until they are no longer a threat. Through it all, Chloe is at the center of the storm, living in the eye of Arthur's hurricane. She sees the toll it takes on him, the weight of the crown of his dark kingdom. She sees the moments of vulnerability, the way he holds her at night as if she's his anchor in a sea of blood, the way he flinches when a car backfires, pushing her behind him. One evening, after the Viper threat has been decisively neutralized, they are at his private home, a secluded lodge by a lake. He's quiet, pensive, staring into the fireplace. "Do you ever wish you could walk away from all this?" she asks softly, coming to sit beside him. He looks at her, the firelight dancing in his stormy eyes. "Every day," he admits, his voice rough. "But this life, it's a gilded cage of my own making. I can't just walk away. There are debts, obligations, a legacy." He reaches out, tracing the line of her jaw. "But then I think of what I walked away from that day in the diner. I think of you, and I know I'd do it all again, 1,000 times over." He kisses her, and this kiss is different from the first. It's not just about hunger or possession, it's full of a desperate, profound love, a shared understanding of the dark path they've walked together. It's a kiss that acknowledges the monster in him and promises her that his teeth will only ever be bared at her enemies. Later, tangled in his sheets, the moon casting silver stripes across the bed, she lies awake, listening to his steady breathing. Her hand rests on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. This man was a killer, a crime lord, an outlaw. He had destroyed a man with the casual ease of swatting a fly and waged a war that had left bodies in its wake, all for her. She thinks of Sarah, the sister he couldn't save. She thinks of the second chance he saw in a diner. And she knows the answer to the question that has haunted her. This wasn't damnation. This was her salvation. It was messy, bloody, and morally ambiguous. It was built on a foundation of violence and fear. But the love that bloomed in that cracked concrete was real. He was her monster, her protector, her king. And in the shadowy empire he ruled, she had found not just safety, but a power of her own. She was the queen who had tamed the beast, not by chaining him, but by accepting the beast as part of the man she loved. And as she finally drifted to sleep, safe in the circle of his arms, she knew she would never, ever want to be anywhere else. The story of Chloe and Arthur was just beginning, a dark fairy tale written in leather, lead, and an unbreakable, forbidden love. The first rays of dawn were painting the lake in hues of rose and gold when Chloe awoke. Arthur was already gone from the bed, but the scent of him, leather, clean soap, and something uniquely male, lingered on the sheets. She found him on the deck, a massive, still silhouette against the waking sky, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. He didn't turn as she approached, but she saw the tension in his shoulders ease as she slipped her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek against the warm, solid plane of his back. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured. His hand came up to cover hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with her own. "Too quiet out here," he grunted, but she knew it was a lie. The quiet was a luxury for him. The noise was always in his head, the plans, the threats, the ghost of his sister, the weight of the gavel he wielded as president. "You sleep okay?" "Better than I have in years," she said, and it was the truth. The terror of the boutique kidnapping had faded, replaced by a profound, unshakable certainty. Arthur's world was violent, but it was honest. The dangers were clear, the enemies defined. It was a strange kind of peace, born from the absolute knowledge of who stood between her and the chaos. He turned in her embrace, his stormy eyes searching hers. "After what happened with the Vipers, I need to know you're sure about this, Chloe, about me. There's no going back to a normal life. Not now." She reached up and traced the line of his jaw, feeling the grit of his morning stubble. "My normal life was a cage with gilded bars, Arthur. This is freedom. It's terrifying, but it's real." She stood on her toes and kissed him, a soft, lingering promise. "I'm sure." A real smile, one that reached his eyes and momentarily banished the shadows, finally broke through. "Good, then get dressed. We're going for a ride." An hour later, she was clinging to his back on a monstrous Harley, the wind whipping her hair, the thunder of the engine vibrating through her entire body. They weren't alone. Jaws and Mouse rode flanking positions, with Paul taking the lead. This wasn't a pleasure cruise, it was a statement. The Prez was with his woman, and the club was her shield. They rode out of the city, the concrete jungle giving way to rolling hills and sprawling oak trees. The destination was a roadside biker bar called The Last Stop, a known Hells Angels friendly establishment. As they rumbled into the gravel parking lot, kicking up a cloud of dust, the place came to life. Men and women in cuts and leather emerged, nodding in respect as Arthur cut the engine. This was a different side of his world. It was loud, boisterous, and surprisingly familial. A massive barbecue was smoking in a corner, and classic rock blared from weathered speakers. An older woman with a kind face and arms full of tattoos, introduced as Maud, the bar owner, immediately pulled Chloe into a hug. "So you're the one," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Heard you've been keeping our Prez on his toes. Good for you. Man was getting too broody." Chloe found herself laughing, a genuine free sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. She was passed around, introduced to old-timers with names like Gears and Pitbull, who treated her not as an outsider but as one of their own. She watched Arthur in his element, not as a feared crime lord but as a respected leader, clapping backs, sharing a beer, his gaze constantly finding hers across the crowd, a silent question in his eyes. "Are you okay?" It was during a moment of relative quiet, as she was sipping a Coke at the bar, that a giant of a man with a beard down to his chest and eyes that had seen too much sat down beside her. It was Jaws. "He's different with you," Jaws rumbled, his voice so low it was almost subsonic. Chloe looked at him, surprised. Jaws was a man of terrifyingly few words. "Seen a lot of women come through," Jaws continued, staring at his own bottle of beer. "Groupies, gold diggers, feds." He took a long swallow. You look at him. Not the patch, not the reputation, you see him." He finally turned his head, his gaze surprisingly intelligent. "Sarah, she would have liked you." The simple statement hit Chloe with the force of a physical blow. It was the highest form of acceptance she could have received from this quiet, lethal man. Before she could form a response, he gave a single sharp nod and stood, melting back into the crowd. The light-hearted atmosphere was a necessary balm, but the reality of Arthur's business was never far away. A few days later, back at the clubhouse, the mood shifted. A problem had arisen. A shipment of high-end electronics, a legitimate front for a more valuable cargo of untraceable firearms, had been hijacked. Not by a rival club, but by a new, ambitious gang calling themselves the Ghosts. They were young, reckless, and stupid, not understanding the ancient, unspoken rules of this world. Arthur convened his men in the church, the club's meeting room. Chloe, now a permanent fixture, was allowed to sit in the common area just outside, the door left ajar. She listened, her blood running cold as the plans were laid. We find them. We make an example, a man named Ripper, the club's enforcer, said flatly. We need to know who's backing them, Paul countered, ever the strategist. This smells like a play. Someone is testing us, using these kids as cannon fodder. Arthur's voice cut through the debate, calm and absolute. Mouse, find them. I want names, addresses, and who they've been talking to. Paul, secure our other assets. Ripper, you and your crew stand ready. There was a pause. This isn't just about product. It's about respect. We show weakness now, and the Vipers will look like a friendly disagreement. The machine was in motion. Over the next 48 hours, Chloe watched the terrifying efficiency of Arthur's empire up close. Mouse, from his bank of computers, tracked the Ghosts through digital breadcrumbs, cell pings, social media brags, credit card receipts from a gas station near the hijack site. The information was fed to Paul, who cross-referenced it with his own network of informants. The picture that emerged was of a gang led by a brash young man named Jason, who was in way over his head. The reclamation was set for a warehouse on the industrial docks. Arthur insisted Chloe stay at the clubhouse, but she refused. I need to see, she told him, her chin held high. I need to understand what you do. All of it. He argued, but he saw the steel in her eyes. He finally relented on one condition. She stayed in the truck with Jaws a block away. From the passenger seat of the Raptor, she watched through binoculars as Arthur and his men descended on the warehouse. It wasn't a chaotic battle. It was a brutal, clinical operation. There were no guns. That would bring the wrong kind of police attention. It was fists, boots, and pipes. The sounds that carried on the night air were the sickening thuds of impact, the sharp cries of pain, and Arthur's voice, a low, steady command. She saw him, a force of nature, moving through the dimly lit space. He wasn't a brawler like Jaws, he was a finisher. He targeted the leader, Jason, disarming him with a swift, brutal move that shattered the younger man's wrist, then forced him to his knees. You took something that belonged to me, Arthur's voice carried, cold and clear. That was a mistake. You work for me now. Every dollar you make, every breath you take is because I allow it. You tell whoever put you up to this that my house is in order. And if they send boys to do a man's job again, I won't be so forgiving. It was a takeover, not a massacre. When Arthur and his men emerged, they were carrying the crates of electronics. They left the Ghosts broken, bleeding, and now indentured to the Hells Angels. Arthur walked back to the truck, his knuckles bleeding, a cut over his eyebrow, but his posture was relaxed. He had re-established control. He slid into the driver's seat, his eyes finding Chloe's in the dim light. He was waiting for her reaction, for the fear, the disgust. Instead, she reached into the first aid kit Jaws kept under the seat, pulled out an antiseptic wipe, and gently began to clean the cut on his brow. Her hand was steady. Is it over? She asked softly. For now, he said, watching her, a new profound respect in his gaze. Good, she whispered, leaning forward to press a soft kiss to his lips, tasting the faint metallic tang of blood. Let's go home. The aftermath of the Ghosts incident solidified Chloe's position in a way nothing else could have. She wasn't just Arthur's woman. She was a part of the club's fabric. She had seen the darkness and hadn't flinched. She started helping Maud with the books at the last stop, her sharp mind for numbers. honed in her old life as a receptionist, proving unexpectedly useful. She became a confidant for some of the older ladies, women who had lived this life for decades and understood its unique pressures and rewards. Yet the outside world still had its claws in her. Her mother, a woman who lived in a pristine suburban bubble, had heard whispers. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Chloe, a woman from the neighborhood, said she saw you on the back of a motorcycle. With one of those men. Her mother's voice was tight with disapproval. Is it true? Are you mixed up with gangsters? Chloe took a deep breath, looking out the window of the townhouse at the sleek black car that was always parked down the street, her permanent shadow. I'm with a man who loves me, Mom, a man who protects me. But at what cost, honey? Her mother pleaded. Your father and I are worried sick. This isn't the life we wanted for you. This is the life I choose, Chloe said, her voice firm. He's a good man. The news says... The news doesn't know him, Chloe interrupted. I do, and I've never been happier or felt safer. You'll have to trust me on that. She hung up, her heart aching but her resolve firm. She had chosen her family. It just didn't look the way her mother had expected. That evening, she told Arthur about the call. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. You could still have that, he said finally, gesturing vaguely as if to encompass the idea of a white picket fence life. A quiet life, a safe life, away from all this. She walked over to him, cupping his face in her hands. Listen to me, Arthur. There is no away from this. You are my this, the danger, the violence, the brotherhood. It's all part of the man I love. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you. The emotion that flashed in his eyes was so raw it stole her breath. He pulled her into a crushing embrace, his face buried in her hair. I don't deserve you, he whispered, his voice thick. Tough, she whispered back, holding him just as tightly. You're stuck with me. Weeks turned into a month of relative calm. The club's business flourished. The message sent by the handling of the ghosts had resonated through the underworld, and challengers were lying low. Arthur and Chloe settled into a domestic rhythm that was both ordinary and extraordinary. They cooked dinner together, they watched movies, they made love with a desperate, passionate intensity that left them both breathless and sated. It was during one of these quiet nights, tangled together on the couch, that Arthur grew unusually quiet. Something's on your mind, Chloe said, running her fingers through his hair. He was silent for a long moment, then he sat up, turning to face her. His expression was serious, almost nervous. The club, it's more than a business, it's a legacy, it's my life's work. And for the first time since I lost her, I can see a future that's about more than just holding on to territory and power. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Chloe's heart stopped. Chloe, he said, his voice low and gravelly with emotion. This life, it's ugly, it's hard. It asks for everything you have and then some. But you've walked into the heart of it and you've made it beautiful. You've given me a reason to build something that lasts, something that means something beyond fear and money. He opened the box. Nestled inside wasn't a traditional diamond, but a stunning deep blue sapphire surrounded by smaller, brilliant diamonds. It was elegant, strong, and utterly unique, like them. Will you marry me? He asked, his stormy eyes holding hers, completely vulnerable, completely open. Will you be my old lady? Not just in name, but in truth. My partner. My queen. Tears streamed down Chloe's face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She wasn't being asked to be a princess in a castle. She was being asked to be a queen in a fortress, to rule beside him in the empire he had built with his own 2 hands. Yes, she breathed, her voice cracking with emotion. Yes, Arthur. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It felt not like a piece of jewelry, but like a coronation. He kissed her then, a kiss that was a vow in itself, a promise of protection, of passion, of a shared destiny. The news was celebrated at the last stop with a raucous party that lasted until dawn. The club, his brothers, they embraced her fully now. She was family, permanently. But in their world, no joy goes unpunished for long. The calm was shattered a week later. Paul, his face grim, interrupted their breakfast. "We have a problem," he said, not mincing words. "It's about Mark." Chloe's stomach tightened. "I thought he was relocated." "He was," Paul said, his gaze flicking to Arthur. "He was set up with a construction job in Phoenix, a clean start, but he couldn't let it go. He's been talking to a reporter, a hungry one from an investigative news outlet. He's spinning a story about a ruthless biker gang that destroyed his life and kidnapped his girlfriend." Arthur's face went dangerously still. "How much does he know?" "Not enough to be a real legal threat," Paul assured him. "But the court of public opinion, and Prez, he's using Chloe's name. He's painting her as a victim we've brainwashed. If this story gets traction, the heat won't just be from rivals. It'll be from the FBI, the ATF, everyone. They'll use it as an excuse to turn our lives inside out." Arthur's fist clenched on the table. This wasn't an attack with fists or guns, it was an attack with words, with lies and half-truths, and it was far more dangerous. Mark, the pathetic weasel, had found a new, more insidious way to strike back. Arthur looked at Chloe, his eyes filled with a furious protectiveness. "I'll handle it." "How?" she asked, her voice trembling. You can't just make him disappear, not if he's talking to a reporter." Arthur's smile was cold and mirthless. "No, you're right. That would only prove his point." He stood up, his mind already racing, plotting a new course through this unexpected storm. "We're going to fight fire with something much, much colder." He turned to Paul. "Get Mouse. We need everything. Every dirty secret Mark ever thought was buried. Every lie he's ever told. Every dollar he ever stole. And get me the name of that reporter. It's time we gave the press a real story." The war for the streets was put on hold. A new war, a war for their narrative, for their future, had just begun. And as Chloe looked at the sapphire glittering on her finger, she knew this was the final test. This was where she would prove what she was made of. She wasn't just standing beside her king. She was ready to fight for their kingdom. The war for the streets was put on hold. A new war, a war for their narrative, for their future, had just begun. Arthur's strategy was not one of brute force, but of devastating intelligence. While Mouse delved into the digital abyss, pulling every one of Mark's secrets into the light, Arthur made a call. He reached out to the reporter, a fiercely ambitious woman named Elena Vance. He didn't threaten her. He invited her to the last stop. Elena arrived, skeptical and armed with a hidden recorder. Arthur, with Chloe seated calmly beside him, her sapphire ring glinting in the low light, laid out the truth. Not with threats, but with evidence. He showed her the police reports Chloe had never filed, the photos of the broken vase, the testimonies from diner patrons who had heard Mark's death threat. Then he gave her Mark. Mouse's dossier was a masterpiece of ruin. Bank records showing the embezzlement, transcripts of his gambling debts, evidence of the counterfeit operation, and sworn statements from the ghosts about Mark's own attempts to hire them to scare Chloe back to him after his relocation. "He's not a victim," Arthur said, his voice low and steady, his hand covering Chloe's on the table. "He's an abuser who faced consequences from a source he couldn't manipulate. We protect our own. That's the only story here." Elena, seeing the raw truth in Chloe's calm, unbroken gaze and the ironclad evidence before her, knew a Pulitzer wasn't in this story's denial, but in its telling. She published an exposé, all right. It was a damning portrait of a predatory man whose web of lies and crime finally ensnared him, and a nuanced look at the unconventional sanctuary found by his victim. Mark was discredited, arrested for embezzlement and fraud, his voice silenced by the crushing weight of his own misdeeds. The final thread of Chloe's old life was snipped, not with violence, but with the cold, clean cut of the truth. That night, she and Arthur stood on the deck of the lake house, the water a sheet of black glass under a canopy of stars. The silence was no longer a void to be feared, but a shared peace, hard-won and deeply cherished. "It's over," Chloe whispered, leaning back against his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart against her back. "Really over?" Arthur's arms tightened around her, his lips brushing her temple. "No, baby," he murmured, his voice a soft rumble in the quiet night. "It's just beginning." He was right. The Empire was secure, their love was their armor, and the future was a vast, uncharted territory that belonged only to them. She turned in his embrace, her sea-green eyes meeting his stormy gray ones, and kissed him under the infinite sky. The monster and the queen bound together not by darkness but by a love that had stared into the abyss and forged its own light. They were safe. They were home. Arthur and Chloe have secured their future, their bond unbreakable, their empire safe. The final threat has been neutralized, not with violence, but with truth closing this chapter of their lives. They stand together, having found redemption and a powerful love in the unlikeliest of places. Their story is complete. Thank you for watching. Would you have accepted the Hell's Angels' protection, knowing the dangerous world that came with it? Subscribe and share your answer in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from.